on the international education sector, which TEQSA has a huge role in regulating, it's more than just dollars. Students are human. They're usually young people who've often made huge sacrifices from them and their families to come and study in our country at some of their formative years. We should welcome that. We should show that care and consideration that these young people have chosen to spend this time in our country, in our cities and regions and towns. Instead, we have the Prime Minister showing an appalling lack of empathy, getting up last year and saying, well, if you don't like it, go home. That ricocheted through the sector. That's exactly what he said, Minister. It's exactly what he said. The minister's over there denying that the Prime Minister told students to go home. I talked a few weeks later with the CEO of one of the large accommodation providers in Sydney. I won't mention the name, but I'm in touch with the sector. I used to be a senior bureaucrat. I chaired the Commonwealth State Officials Group for this sector. I ran the sector in Victoria. I actually do know something about this, Minister, perhaps unlike you who had all your submissions bounced at Cabinet last year. So this CEO of the accommodation provider, in relation to the international ed sector, that's what they tell us. They said that the minister, well, you were actually the immigration minister. You were the immigration minister. That's what the sector believes. The Prime Minister and Treasurer were personally hostile to this sector. And any minister that took anything to Cabinet to try and do something got thrown out. No, we're not interested. We're hostile to this sector. But the CEO of this accommodation provider told me very clearly that the day after the Prime Minister said, if you don't like it, go home, he had students lining up at the front desk, taking that literally, saying, well, I have to check out. The Prime Minister told me to go home. Now, many of these students fall in love with Australia and Australians. We should show more compassion and a bit of care and empathy. TEQSA has a role in this, but it's also whole-of-government considerations. We've spoken in other forums in other places about the students stranded offshore, the billions of dollars lost, the lives destroyed, but I also just want to place on the record that there's another group of students, not the current or prospective students, but the students who've already made that investment in Australia, who frankly were sold a promise by the government that if they studied here for 3 years or 4 years or whatever the period was, they'd get a 485 visa, a graduate 485 visa, and be allowed to stay and work in Australia for 1 year or 2 years, as the case may be. The government should do the right thing by these students and actually commit that they will extend, renew or allow students to enter when the borders are open and it's safe to do so. We've got tens of thousands of students around the world trashing Australia's reputation. They feel misled, they feel abandoned by the government that can't even extend them that olive branch and say, we know you've invested in Australia, we know we made you a promise, we will honour that promise. We may not be able to do it now, but we will honour it. It's not a difficult thing to do, and it'd help restore some of our international reputation. This is a sector that relies on word of mouth. I'm sure the minister would agree with that. This is a sector which overwhelmingly relies on word of mouth from former students who studied here, from current students saying to their mates and their families back home, Australia's a good place to come and study, you should come here. That's what marketing of international ed is fundamentally about. And the word of mouth right now for Australia is being trashed. It's a very small thing that the government could do, is extend that olive branch to students who've got a 485 visa or a right for post-study work rights and say that they will be allowed to come back. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.